Section 1. The Chamber. You wake to the scrape of iron against stone. The sound is distant at first, muffled by the pounding in your head, but it drags you out of the fog of shallow, dreamless sleep. The air in the chamber is thick with the stale scent of sweat, fear, and rancid olive oil. Somewhere nearby, water drips in a slow, maddening rhythm. You blink into the darkness, your eyes straining for light that isn't there. The stone beneath your bare back is cold and damp, clinging to your skin like a second, miserable layer. You shift slightly, wincing as pain blooms along your ribs, bruises in shades of blue and sickly yellow, the kind that ache even when you're still. The iron cuff around your left ankle bites into raw skin, and when you try to move, dried blood cracks and flakes to the floor. A faint sound leaks through the heavy door, laughter. Not the warm laughter of friends, but something sharp and cutting, echoing from the great hall above. You know that laughter. You've heard it before, the laughter of men who are full of wine, full of themselves, and in search of something to break. The footsteps come next. Heavy. Purposeful. The slap of leather soles on marble, each step steady, unhurried, a predator in no rush because it knows its prey has nowhere to run. You scramble for the thin tunic crumpled in the corner, your hands shaking as you pull the coarse fabric over your shoulders. The door groans open, letting in a shaft of harsh sunlight that stabs your eyes. You raise a trembling hand against the glare and see him, the one they call Ariston. He fills the doorway like a mountain, his arms roped with muscle, his bald scalp gleaming with sweat. His face is a map of old scars, each one a story he's never had to tell because everyone already knows. Ariston's gaze travels over you with the slow calculation of a man inspecting livestock. On your feet, he growls, tossing a damp cloth onto the floor beside you. Clean yourself? Lord Timaeus has guests tonight. Important guests. His tone makes the word important sound like a threat. You don't ask questions. You know better by now. As Ariston turns to leave, his voice drifts back through the doorway. Be ready. He says you'll be entertaining? Your stomach knots. You know what that means. You've known since the night they came to your village. Section 2. The Taking. You were 14 when the strangers came. Your village lay hidden between rolling hills and olive groves, far enough from the main road that visitors were rare. Life was hard but familiar, days spent herding goats along rocky paths, evenings around the hearth listening to your father's stories while your mother wove wool by the firelight. The year before the taking had been cruel. First came the late frost that killed the barley shoots. Then the drought, 3 months of pitiless sun that baked the earth into cracked clay and left the olive trees clinging to life. By midsummer, the well had sunk to a foul-smelling trickle. You remember your parents arguing in whispers at night. About debts. About the creditors from the city. About the tax collector who no longer smiled when he visited. You pretended to be asleep, but their voices carried through the thin walls. When the men arrived, they didn't come as raiders. They wore fine wool tunics dyed in colors no one in your village could afford, their belts hung with polished bronze buckles. They brought no weapons save for short knives, but the armed escorts who followed them, 6 men in bronze helmets and armor, made it clear violence was never far from reach. Your father greeted them in the village square. His hands were dry and cracked from years of labor, but they trembled as he clasped the merchant's hand. You didn't understand their words at first. The city dialect was strange, but then you caught the important ones. Debt. Payment. Service. The merchant, a thin man with neatly trimmed beard and the polished ease of someone used to command, looked you over like a craftsman inspecting marble for flaws. He asked your age, prodded your shoulder, forced you to open your mouth so he could see your teeth. Your father wouldn't meet your eyes. Your mother had her face buried in her hands. You remember the merchant's smile when the agreement was reached, how he counted out silver coins into a small pouch. Each one clinked like the fall of a door bolt. You didn't realize then that every coin was a year of your life you'd never get back. They told you it was temporary. That you'd serve in the city for a few years, earn good money, and return with enough wealth to buy land of your own. They told you you'd be treated well. That you were lucky. By nightfall, you were chained at the neck with 6 other boys, walking behind the merchant's horse toward the fading light of the west. You did not look back. You couldn't bear to see your mother still sitting in the square, her shoulders shaking silently. Section 3. The Road to the City. The chain at your neck was short enough that you could feel the breath of the boy behind you on your back. His name was Dorian. You'd learned it in the brief moments when the guards weren't watching, but after the first day, he stopped speaking. His eyes seemed fixed on something only he could see. The first night, they chained you all to an iron ring hammered into the earth, like animals tethered in a pasture. The ground was too hard for comfort, and every shift of your body sent the cold metal collar rubbing against the skin of your neck. You tried to sleep, but the cries of the youngest boy, barely 12, carried through the darkness until one of the guards silenced him with a backhand. The days became a rhythm of pain. March at dawn. Stop when the merchant decided. Eat whatever was thrown into your hands, hard bread, dried figs, or nothing at all. Drink from streams when you passed them, if the guards allowed. Your feet blistered, the leather of your sandals worn thin within a week. The land was beautiful in a way that hurt. Rolling green hills that dipped into valleys of wildflowers. Sparkling rivers that twisted toward the sea. The air was heavy with the scent of thyme and cypress. But you didn't see beauty anymore, only distance. Distance from home. Distance from freedom. Sometimes, men from roadside farms would stop their work to watch you pass. They rarely spoke, and when they did, it was to the merchant, asking prices as if you were livestock. The merchant would smile, shake his head, and say, "Not these, they're bound for finer service." The older boys in the chain, ones with scars across their backs and eyes that had already gone dull, told you things in whispers when the guards were far enough away. That some were bought for the fields, where they would work from sunrise to sunset until their bodies broke. That others were kept in houses to serve food and wine to guests. And that a few, the pretty ones, as one scarred boy called them with bitter contempt, were bought for something worse. You didn't understand at first. You didn't want to. On the 9th day, the walls of the city rose ahead of you, white stone gleaming in the sun. They looked like the walls of heaven, if heaven had gates guarded by soldiers who checked ledgers instead of prayers. You thought briefly that maybe this would be the end of the journey. You didn't yet know it was only the beginning. Section 4. The Market. The air inside the city was thicker, not with dust, but with life. Shouts from vendors hawking olives, wine, and pottery. The creak of wagon wheels over cobblestones. The mingled smells of bread baking, meat roasting, and refuse rotting in the gutters. You were herded through the streets, people glancing at the chain around your necks with the casual indifference of those used to seeing such things. A few looked away quickly, not out of pity, but to avoid catching the merchant's eye. When you reached the square, you heard it before you saw it, a roar of voices high and low, all speaking at once. Then the smell hit, sweat, unwashed bodies, and something acrid you couldn't name. The market was laid out like an open-air theater. Rows of wooden platforms ringed the square, each occupied by human bodies. Some were men with the muscles of farm laborers, others were women holding infants, and some were children younger than you, their eyes wide with a confusion you knew too well. The merchant unclipped you from the main chain one by one, passing each of you to an assistant who shoved you toward a wooden tub. The water inside was lukewarm, slick with oil. You were scrubbed hard enough to raise welts, then rubbed down with olive oil until your skin shone in the sunlight. A man with a sharp nose and ink-stained fingers approached, carrying a wax tablet. "Age?" he asked the merchant. 15 summers, the merchant said without looking at you. The scribe nodded, jotting something down. Then he tilted your head back to inspect your teeth. "Strong," he said. "No signs of sickness." You were led to a platform where 2 other boys already stood. One was tall, with amber eyes and a proud tilt to his chin. The other was small, thin, and trembling so badly you could hear his teeth chatter. The auctioneer began to speak. He described you as well-proportioned, mountain-born, obedient in manner, suitable for household service. Each word felt like another strip of flesh being peeled from you. Bidding started. You tried not to hear the numbers, but they came anyway, the value of your life rising and falling in the mouths of strangers. The man who won was not the richest in the square, but he bid with a confidence that told you he always got what he wanted. His name, you would later learn, was Nicandros. He was broad-shouldered, with carefully curled hair and a short beard flecked with gray. His tunic was dyed a deep green, and the heavy gold ring on his finger glinted as he handed over the coins. When his eyes met yours, there was no anger, no pity. Only possession. Section 5. The House of Nicandros. Nicandros's house stood in the wealthy quarter, where the streets were quieter and the air smelled less of sweat and more of rosemary from the private gardens. The walls were high and whitewashed, crowned with terracotta tiles that caught the late afternoon sun. The gate swung open at the knock of his steward, revealing a courtyard paved with mosaic tiles and intricate patterns, waves, dolphins, and swirling vines. In the center stood a fountain, its water clear and cool, falling into a shallow marble basin. The sight made your throat ache with thirst, but you knew better than to ask. Inside, the rooms were large, the walls painted in deep reds and ochres, the floors inlaid with mosaics depicting heroes and gods. But your eyes kept drifting to the people, other slaves, moving with quiet precision. Some carried trays of wine, some knelt scrubbing floors, others hurried past with folded linens. A man with a neatly trimmed beard and sharp eyes approached. He was tall but lean, and moved like a man who could strike quickly if he needed to. His clothing was plain, but his belt was of fine leather. "This is Leontios," Nicandros said without looking at you. "He keeps order here." Leontios's gaze swept over you the way a blacksmith examines metal before forging it. "You'll do," he said. "Follow me." He led you down a long corridor to a staircase that descended into the earth. The air grew cooler, the light dimmer, until you reached a row of small stone chambers with wooden doors. Inside each was a straw mattress, a thin blanket, and a clay pot in the corner. "You'll sleep here," Leontios said. "You'll wake at first light, wash, and wait for orders. You'll eat twice a day. You'll speak only when spoken to. And you will never," his eyes hardened, "never refuse what is asked of you." You nodded, though your throat was tight. He turned to leave, then paused. "If you do well, you may earn privileges, extra food, better clothes. If you fail—" He let the sentence hang, unfinished, but you understood perfectly. That night, lying on the straw, you listened to the muffled sounds of the house above, footsteps on marble, the murmur of voices, and somewhere, faintly, the echo of laughter. Section 6. The Others. The next morning, Leontios brought you to the kitchen. The air was warm with the scent of baking bread and stewing lentils, but no one lingered to enjoy it. Slaves moved in brisk lines, fetching jars of oil, chopping herbs, carrying water from the courtyard cistern. "This is your workroom for now," Leontios said, "until Lord Nicandros decides otherwise." One by one, he introduced you to the others. There was Menon, a broad-shouldered man with a burned scar down one arm who kneaded dough with a strength that seemed to come from anger. He gave you a nod, neither friendly nor hostile. "Keep your head down," he murmured when Leontios's back was turned. "And don't draw eyes if you can help it." Then there was Lysandra, a quiet woman with lines at the corners of her mouth, who prepared herbs and spices with deft fingers. She did not look up from her work, but her voice was low and steady when she said, "Some eyes here are worse than others." Finally, there was a boy not much older than you, lean, sharp-faced, with restless dark eyes. "Name's Delos," he said with a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I was you 2 years ago." You wanted to ask what he meant, but Leontios's voice cut through the room. "Enough talk. The master has guests tonight. Every hand will be needed." That day passed in a blur of labor. You fetched water, scrubbed the marble floor of the dining hall until your arms ached, polished the silver goblets until they gleamed like mirrors. As the sun set, servants moved through the halls lighting oil lamps, their flames casting long shadows across the painted walls. In the kitchen, Delos worked beside you, his voice pitched so only you could hear. The feasts are when you'll see them for what they are. The masters. The guests. You'll learn quick. What do you mean? You asked, keeping your head bent over the polishing cloth. You'll see, he said, his smile gone now. And when you do, remember, there's no kindness in this house that doesn't cost you something. Section 7, The Feast. By nightfall, the great hall glowed with lamplight. The long couches were arranged in a semicircle around low tables, each set with polished cups, bowls of olives, figs, and roasted meats. The air smelled of honeyed wine and burning myrrh. Nicandros appeared dressed in a tunic of deep indigo, a golden clasp at his shoulder. He moved through the room like a man who owned not just the house but the air everyone breathed. Behind him, the guests filed in, men with heavy rings and soft hands, draped in fine wool and scented with expensive oils. You stood with Delos and 2 other young slaves by the wall, heads lowered, waiting for Leontiosa's signal. At first, the tasks were simple: refill cups, serve platters of food, wipe spills from the tables. The guests laughed and spoke of trade deals, of new ships in the harbor, of disputes in the council chamber. Their voices rose with each round of wine, their gestures loosening. Then the tone shifted. One guest, a plump man with flushed cheeks, beckoned to Delos. "Come here, boy," he said, his voice slurred but sharp. Delos obeyed, kneeling beside the couch to pour wine into the man's cup. The guest's hand lingered on his shoulder. Too long. Too familiar. Another guest, his hair streaked with silver, motioned you forward. "You," he said, eyes narrowing as if assessing a piece of fine pottery. "What's your name?" You hesitated, remembering Leontiosa's warning. "Whatever the master wishes to call me, lord." A smile curled at the man's lips. "Polite," he said. "I like that." His fingers reached for your chin, tilting your face upward. "You'll stay by me tonight." From the corner of your eye, you saw Leontios watching. He gave the smallest nod, an order without words. The conversation at the couches grew louder, the jokes cruder. Some guests began making wagers, the kind where the stakes were not coin but humiliation. The slaves became the evening's game pieces, called over to sing, to dance, to kneel at their master's feet while laughter rolled around the room. By the end of the night, your hands were shaking, not from the weight of the wine jugs, but from understanding. Delos had been right. This was not service. This was ownership in its rawest form. And you had just been marked for more of it. Section 8, The Summons. When the feast finally broke, the guests drifted away in 2s and 3s, some laughing still, others muttering as they stumbled toward the courtyard. Servants moved quickly to clear the wreckage, overturned cups, smeared platters, spilled wine staining the mosaics. You thought, for a brief moment, that you'd be sent back to the cellar to sleep. But the man with silver in his hair was still reclining on his couch, a half-empty cup in hand. His eyes found you again, and the corner of his mouth lifted. "Stay," he said, his tone casual, as if speaking to a hunting dog. Leontiosa's hand landed on your shoulder. "Go with him," he murmured, the words meant only for you. "And remember what I told you." The guest led you down a side corridor lit by oil lamps and bronze holders. The walls here were painted with scenes of banquets, men reclining, cups in hand, slaves standing nearby with lowered eyes. In the flickering light, the painted figures seemed to shift, their smiles stretching too wide. The chamber he brought you to was smaller than the hall, but richly decorated. Cushions in deep red piled against the walls, a low table set with a tray of figs and honey. The air was thick with the scent of burning resin. He closed the door behind you. "What's your name?" he asked again, stepping closer. You remembered Leontiosa's warning, never refuse what is asked of you, and said, "As the master wishes, lord." He chuckled softly. "Obedient," he said, his hand brushing the side of your face. "Good." The next moments blurred, the weight of his hand, the sound of his breathing, the way your body froze even as your mind screamed. You kept your eyes fixed on the painted wall behind him, on a scene of a ship sailing across a calm blue sea. You imagined yourself on that ship, the wind in your hair, the shore shrinking behind you. When it was over, he dismissed you with a flick of his hand. "Leontios will see you back," he said, already reaching for another cup of wine. You walked the corridor in silence, the scent of resin clinging to your skin. Leontios was waiting near the kitchen door. He looked at you for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "You did as you were told. That's all that matters." But it didn't feel like it was all that mattered. Not to you. Section 9. The Breaking Point. Days blurred into weeks. The routine of the house became muscle memory. Wake, wash, work, wait for orders. Feasts came and went, some raucous, others subdued, but the pattern never changed. The guests' laughter was always the same, sharp and hollow, a sound you learned to dread more than shouting. You began to read the signs in the others. The Los, quick with a grin when new slaves were brought in, but quiet after the feasts, his eyes fixed on the floor. Menon, who avoided the great hall entirely, working only in the heat of the kitchen where the noise couldn't reach him. Lysandra, who spoke rarely, but when she did, it was to warn you of who to avoid. One night, as you cleared the hall after another long evening, you saw a boy you hadn't met before. He was young, smaller than you had been when you arrived, with sunburn still peeling from his cheeks. His tunic was too big for him, slipping from one shoulder. He stared at the empty couches with the dazed expression of someone not yet able to understand what was happening. You knew that look. You remembered wearing it. Later, when the others were sleeping, you found him in the corner of the cellar, knees pulled to his chest. You crouched beside him. "What's your name?" you asked quietly. "Irenaeus," he whispered. His voice trembled. They said I'll serve in the hall tomorrow." You didn't tell him the truth. Not yet. Instead, you took a small bronze hairpin from the fold of your blanket, something you'd hidden for months without knowing why. You pressed it into his palm. "For when you need it," you said. He looked at you with wide, uncertain eyes. "For escape? Maybe," you said. "Or for something else. But it means you still have a choice." The next day, you were summoned to Nicandros' study. He stood by the window, looking out at the sunlit courtyard. "You've been here long enough," he said without turning. "Too long. I've arranged for you to be sent to a work gang in the marble quarries. You'll leave tomorrow." You felt nothing, not relief, not fear, only the strange emptiness that had grown inside you over the years. The quarries meant slow death, but the house had been its own kind of dying. That night you lay on the straw mattress, listening to the breathing of the others. You thought of Irenaeus and hoped he would use the hairpin well, for freedom, or for ending his story on his own terms. When dawn came, you stepped into the courtyard where the guards waited. The gates opened, and the road stretched ahead, white with dust. You didn't look back. Somewhere behind you, the laughter in the great hall went on. And somewhere ahead, the sun rose over another day that would belong to someone else.